Hello everyone, it's Mrs. Wallace. How are you? I am out today, so I'm sorry about that, but we will gather together on Thursday. And just two requests for you. One is just to watch this short video clip. I'm just going to highlight some of the content that you all talked about yesterday. And the other thing to check out is I'm going to post a reading. It is called A Pamphlet War on the Continental Congress. It is a loyalist and patriot debate. It is excerpts from two pamphlets that go back and forth. So look at this as like a debate that's happening in written form. One is Samuel Seabury, and the other is Alexander Hamilton. Both of these men write at the time about the happenings of the Continental Congress in 1774. And they write anonymously, so they write under pseudonyms. Samuel Seabury is a Westchester farmer, and Alexander Hamilton writes as a friend to America. So you're really looking at two pages that you can just read on your own and annotate. So as you're reading, read carefully. You want to get some of the ideas as to what is Samuel Seabury saying and what is Alexander Hamilton saying, what is their debate about. And before you do that, read and annotate. If you can look at this particular video, because we'll try to get you just kind of comfortable with some of the content before the Continental Congress. And I think, you have a good amount of it because you did a nice job on your discussion. You were noting some significant things in the timeline and you were weighing, some of the significance of those things. So I heard a lot about, maybe political causes as time went on, particular issues of representation, maybe that didn't start some of the colonist issues that was about taxes or whatnot, but maybe in time there became this like mindset that's really different. So, some things that we can talk about. One of the readings, by the way, that was on Schoology for the discussion is the Gordon Wood reading. We'll talk about that in class on Thursday also. I have some hard copies of that, so if you prefer a hard copy of that reading, it's not an easy read. Stop by on Wednesday and I'll give you the hard copy because we'll talk about that on Thursday. Just a couple of big takeaways so you have it, and at some point we will have a quiz on some of this content, so use this to kind of get a sense of what kind of information do I really need to know about these various things on the timeline. A couple of things, we know that after the Stamp Act gets repealed, the colonists do find themselves under what's called the Declaratory Act, something that the British put in there. And, I think somebody said it yesterday at the discussion, it feels like, Britain is like, saving face. They really have to do something because they repealed the Stamp Act, which is kind of embarrassing. So, ultimately they have to do something. And I think it's a good way to interpret it. The colonists don't really take the Declaratory Act with all that much seriousness because their big issue was the Stamp Act, and now that had been repealed, and they don't really see it as something significant because it doesn't have the words of a tax in it. It's probably just some sort of language that, had to happen and whichever. So colonists don't take it serious, but it really is following the Declaratory Act that we see colonial resistance to the crown grow and become even more violent. So some of the first violence, mob violence, becomes the case, during the fight for the Stamp Act repeal, but some of that grows even more so. The Townshend Acts become significant. This is something where previously Grenville in England had been passing some of the earlier tax legislation pieces. This will be a little bit different. Grenville will be out. Lord Rockingham is going to be part of the new group of people. There is a tax on a variety of goods, and there's a sense that these taxes are going to be fine because they are taxes that are on a variety of products, not only a variety of products, but they are not direct taxes. The colonists in the Stamp Act make a big case that they don't like the tax is not an import tax. It's a tax on any piece of paper that gets purchased in the colonies. Somebody has to buy the paper with the stamp. This is very different because it's really a tax that's on imports. And so the British are like, all right, we'll do this kind of tax because this is what the colonists seem to say, must be the case. But there are a bunch of resentments about the Townshend Acts because it's on a variety of products that people typically use. And so we start to see this like kind of effort of boycotts. And this becomes really significant because one, it becomes a place where there's some coordination. Colonists, in order to do a boycott successfully, you need a lot of people to boycott. And we get some representation from particular groups, including women, for example, who don't necessarily have a lot of political power in the framework of the British colonies, but they do have the power to decide what their families purchase. And the decision, for example, for women and women's groups to give up tea and to use something else or buy something else. There's a lot of ways that people kind of make this boycott really significant. And so this becomes like the boycott and the response to the Townshend Act. And I think also might have been Alex who mentioned the notion of John Dickinson, the letters from the American farmer. This is also really significant because we get some particular voices and particular people who step up to indicate their disdain for the Townshend Acts in this case, and it creates kind of a messaging, for members of the public. And people are either, supporting or not supporting John Dickinson, but that becomes important. A lot of you noted the significant violence of the Boston Massacre. This is in 1770. And as you noted in class, there's a lot of discussion about what actually happened, right? It's very, very likely that there were growing tensions in Boston. There was a great deal of economic competition. Soldiers from Britain had come to ensure the safety of a custom house. There was a sentinel who was guarding the custom house. So because there were attacks on things related to custom taxes and whatnot, there also is some of the soldiers were looking for additional opportunities to make some money. And so there's like bigger competition for local jobs and some resistance that Americans had to this like, standing army. And that tension was already building. The night of the Boston Massacre, it's likely that there was a sentinel that was being pelted with snowballs, and colonists were walking through, the streets with large sticks and being threatening. But exactly what happened, who fired first, whether Preston, gave the order to fire, lots of those things are heavily debated. There is a trial afterwards in which John Adams does defend the British, and only a few of them are acquitted on much lesser charges. So in a way, some of his defense is fairly successful for the British, but the colonists really do use this event as a propaganda tool. And you can see that in the imagery from Paul Revere, who gets very noted for some of his propaganda, but especially this one, which gets, kind of shared throughout the colonies. This is something that, suggests that the British kind of came and Preston in the back gave the order and all the British just, fire. And, Crispus Attucks, who is a black man, even though he's not necessarily depicted that way in Paul Revere's imagery, there is a large sense of the violence that affected the colonists, right? Blood rushing from people's heads and people, in pools of blood, and all of this being in color, with the color red, the red coats and the blood being so red. This imagery is really significant and definitely exists as some degree of propaganda. Revere actually copied this um, from another artist, and created his own version of this. So it is an interesting thing, and this is a time period where there is a great deal of propaganda that's written and visual. But this arguably does have an effect. We see after the Boston Massacre, outgrowth of responses. There is a fear of some of that radicalism, a fear of some of that in some of the other colonies, but at the same time, a concern about the British and what's happening in Boston. The Tea Act, which kind of is connected to the British East India Company, there really is an interest in trying to protect this company and enable it to survive. It has really not seen its sales be that good, so the plan is just to enable the British East India Company to dominate, the market in the colonies. This is kind of a mercantile move, and the colonists don't go for it, and there's more boycotts, especially regarding tea. And we kind of get this movement into people who stand up for the colonists, tea agents who resign, people who are refusing shipments. So even though we know that this builds up to what's called the Boston Tea Party, there's a lot of other places that also refuse to load the ships, try to, not sign off on orders. So there's a lot of resistance among the colonies not to accept this British tea. Of course, in Boston, there is going to be a royal governor who upholds the law, orders 3 ships to drop off their cargo, and that payment should actually be made. So in Boston, there's a movement to kind of go through with this collection of the tea, and we see the boarding of the ships. People dress as Native Americans and dump the tea very carefully. There's an interest in not affecting the ship at all, not doing a lot of damage, but dumping every single spot of tea, so the tea chests get dumped in the water. And this does have mixed responses around the colonies. There is this sense among some groups of people, and some groups of people who maintain their loyalty to the British throughout the entirety of the war. Some people will see this radicalism as very problematic. Boston radicals that are, in a way not serving to be loyal to the king, and they're radicals that are problematic. And this will also create some kind of interest in them being significant, right? So we see responses to the Boston Tea Party. The coercive acts, and I think some of you noted the significance of the coercive acts, and something that's not really on this slideshow but should be on this slideshow are some of the efforts where the colonists do develop communication tools. In some cases, initially, it's like within a colony, and then it is between colonies. And so you see things like the Stamp Act Congress, right? And these committees for correspondence, as ways that there are radicals and even some moderates throughout the colonies who have concerns about the actions of the British, how they are responding to this, and in a lot of cases, how they're connecting with each other. The coercive acts will kind of enable a lot more of that collaboration to happen. These do be called the intolerable acts. The British call them the coercive acts. They are essentially punishment for Boston, and it's a series of acts. There's 4 altogether, and then the Quebec Act, if we add that one. The acts include the Boston Port Bill, so this is really significant until Boston repays the British East India Company for the tea that they dumped. The Boston Harbor is going to be closed. So this is essentially a British blockade of Boston, very influential on the economy because Boston is a major port city at the time. There's a piece of this is about quartering, ensuring that militia, British military can be quartered in American homes. This had already been the case in some places, but this seems to be like a reinforcement of something that was already in place and maybe not handled all that much or all that seriously. The Massachusetts Government Act does a few things. This is going to strip people of self-government, so no more colonial governments. And there's also going to be the idea that right by jury, people can be taken to Britain basically for trial. So that becomes really, really important. We'll talk about the Quebec Act a little bit more in class, but some of the response that we see are the First Continental Congress. Okay, so we'll look at Thursday as a day to really focus on the